It's the Roleplay Geeks podcast, June 8th, 2020. In this episode, we got away about talking through role-playing and pop culture. First up, this is the time we remember when we first played games based upon pop culture. We discuss great scenes from a pop culture restaurant filled with D&D episodes. Frank takes a big shot at the innocent man, Tom Hanks. The geeks say goodbye to Hollywood after they sell out part of their childhood for a commercial. Jimbo does his best angry young man impression to John before he goes to extremes with murder Muppets on Sesame Street. And finally, Frank tells John about it by passively-aggressively littering the intro with Billy Joel references when he talks smack about the Joel. All coming up in Roleplay Geeks. All right, everybody, welcome to Roleplay Geeks. I'm Frank.
I'm the token hippie, John.
I'm Steve.
I'm Jim.
Today we're going to talk a little bit about role-playing and pop culture and sort of how that's, kind of evolved over the years. It originally started in not exactly pop culture, but is certainly intermixed with pop culture over the years. In particular, we're going to focus on, tabletop role-playing type games as opposed to, video games or that sort of thing. Okay, so the very first role-playing game that we played with pop culture influences was...
Doctor Who for me.
Doctor Who. Okay, so this is a thing that I'm going to take as a given because I genuinely don't remember it at all. Not even a little bit.
That's probably a good thing because it was not fun. It wasn't very good. I felt like you were handcuffed and you had to do Doctor Who type stuff, and I don't know, it just wasn't fun.
Well, it was based on the Star Trek RPG, which, when that came out, 82, 83, the original one? Not the fan one. It seems like I remember there was a fan one from the 70s that was printed out like on a dot matrix printer that I saw one time. But it was based on that. And I barely remember that Star Trek RPG at the time because it seemed so unnecessarily different than what we were playing in Dungeons and Dragons and what we had experimented with in Star Frontiers and Gamma World and those things.
So
do you all remember?
I remember the game
mechanics?
well, and I can picture the cover clear as a bell in my head. I don't ever remember actually playing it. I remember reading the rules and thinking, my God, this makes Top Secret look simple. It was really convoluted and weird, and it was very focused on making authentic simulation. From what I recall, authentic simulation to Star Trek, which, you've got to balance game fun with representation. So I don't actually remember ever playing it, but I do remember reading it and thinking, I don't know if I could play this.
Sorry, are you speaking about the Star Trek
role-playing game? Yeah, the Star Trek role-playing game. And that would have come out, like Steve said, was it 82 or something like that? And I remember having access to it, but I can't remember why. And I don't know that I owned it, but I do remember reading it and being... I might have.
I thought you did own it because we made little Lego ships for, it was almost like what we got out of the Star Trek RPG in I don't know, maybe it was 83, 84, it was similar to what ended up happening with Battletech was, building the mechs and thinking about the mechs and maybe even playing the mechs. I know looking at the technical readouts and all for the Star Trek stuff, that was far more enjoyable. And I know you had one of those books because it had a dreadnought in the back. And that was my favorite ship. But it was always more about the ships.
Yeah, I remember that. But so that might have been the first interaction I had with a pop culture based role playing game. But I don't think we ever played it.
I didn't.
No, this actually would have been earlier than we were hanging out.
Yeah, just independent of you guys, I didn't play it. The Doctor Who one is the only one I could remember that we gave a shot.
Yeah, I think that was one that Chad got when we went down to Blacksburg maybe one time. Found it down there.
Like Doctor Who, I bought it myself at Walden's Books.
Wow.
Is that
Walden's
what it was called?
Books?
Yeah.
Walden's?
In the mall.
Walden Books.
I remember that pretty clearly. I bought that there, and I also bought Paranoia there.
Oh, yeah, I remember Paranoia.
So here's a follow-up question. We remember pop culture related role-playing games, but other than dipping our toes in Star Wars in the past 10 years, I don't think that there is I don't believe that there's a role-playing game based on another piece of fiction that was popular in culture that I have maintained any kind of play with, or that I really, really love the system and I want to go back to it. And I've done Farscape, Babylon 5, Wheel of Time, Star Trek, and I looked at Doctor Who when the new version came out. That was about 10 or 11 years ago. And it seemed to have a really neat system that I think John would have enjoyed, because it was a difficulty-based system where you had a skill and an attribute, and those would add together to give you a bonus on a 2d6 roll, and then you had a difficulty number for whatever the task was. And I think, someone can correct me if you all know this better than I do, I think that it had a system where your success was variable. So just because you rolled over the target number, it didn't mean it was, I think they called it a complete success, but it meant that you had a varying degree of success. And how successful that was is how difficult the action was and what the DM thought the difficulty should be and how much of a positive result you would get from your roll. Ooh. Okay.
That's a
at least I think
long-winded
that's how it
way
went.
of saying fudge factor.
Yeah. So
Fudge factor.
you bounced over a couple of things there. I want to go back just a little bit. I actually think the first, and if I'm remembering the order wrong, I might be, but I thought the first pop culture role-playing game we played was the first edition of Star Wars, which is a system that the mechanics of which John and I both really love.
Yeah, I thought it was excellent. I
Over
thought
at
they did
Chad's,
a really
right?
nice job with it. The only problem I had with it is the fact that when you get a pop culture-esque kind of game, then it's kind of, you feel like you're kind of stuck in that paradigm, It's also like for the Star Wars, everybody wants to be generally you kind of want to be like a Jedi. So you kind of end up making your character very much like Luke Skywalker. Oh, I can fly ships and blah, blah, blah. Or you're basically playing a character in the game. Now when we did our latest one more recently, it wasn't, but kind of hot off the press as I think it was West End Games did that one.
Yeah.
When it came out, we're like, whoa! And it was, we were very much into the whole, oh, we're going to do this. And there was supposed to be stuff out there to be able to do like space battles. So we thought, oh my God, this is going to be just great. Oh my God. And
I actually have that.
Oh, yeah.
I moved my books this today, and I moved my role-playing books to a place that's a little more accessible for us when we play. And I have the space battle part for West End Games. Star
like
Tactics or something, whatever it was called.
Yeah, like a black box. It's supposed to be in space. Yeah, I remember that. I remember seeing that now. Yeah,
we never played it. I don't think.
I don't think we did.
But to answer Steve's question, so I want to bounce to it. Is actually there's one other system that we played within the last 10 years. We didn't keep it up, but I rather like the system, which is Firefly. So Firefly has a role-playing game that has probably a couple now, but I have, I think, the first edition of Firefly, and I have the books for it. And it introduced mechanics that I really liked and have adopted as much as possible in all my games. And one of the things is that you as a player had the ability to change the story or change things for the GM. So you could use, I forgot what it was, like
plot points.
Plot points, right? You use plot points. You could say, okay, I'm going to change the plot this way. And the GM, essentially not dissimilar to when you're learning to do, what's it called? When you're acting and making stuff up. Improv. I couldn't play the name. Improv. When you're learning improv, it's a yes and type of thing. So you say something, go yes and blah, blah, blah. And I really love that mechanic. I also remember the rest of the mechanics were not anything super special. And I will say it's the only time I felt very pleased with my GMing on a space-based system. So that's the only one that really, it stuck out a lot to me when we played. I don't know, it's been 7 or 8 years ago now, but it's been when we played it. That's the only other pop one that I can think of.
Yeah, that's a big win for you.
What?
Feeling good about a space.
Well, yeah, I mean I never do,
because you always feel bad about it.
Yeah. But I think that John's got a point here that so there's an interesting thing going on right now. So Fantasy Flight puts out the X-Wing miniatures game, and they have had up until this last year an entire wing for role playing, and they put out the latest version of Star Wars role playing game, and they had lots of different Age of Rebellion and all sorts of different books, and we played that for a little bit, which is, the murder bots and things like that. But it was a pretty fun game, but they've recently shut down their role-playing division. And I suspect, if I remember correctly, I think they got the license prior to Disney buying all this stuff out. And now that Disney owns it, I think one of the challenges for a genre-based game like that's based in pop culture is the licensing, dealing with those headaches. And I'm wondering if that's why they don't really catch on that much. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I think that'd probably be a really large factor for many of these game systems. Like especially now, I'm sure even before it was probably ridiculously expensive. Not only to pay for a license, but then also some of these I'm sure have some pretty high thresholds for, your game has to do this and it can't go here and it can't do this, it can't do that. And I'm sure it's probably far worse for something like Star Wars now, where, owned by a Disney, size company. And then there's the other aspect of it, like Firefly is a really good example of, well, they just got this thing wrong. That's, where you have so many people that are fans of a said, intellectual or, pop culture property. And, they see that, wow, this is horribly done. This is the worst, mechanic to resolve skills and combat I've ever seen. This sucks. And then, I think that'd be a real big issue to do that. I mean, it might be a big draw for people, but at the same time, it can be a very large, hindrance, a tall fence to jump over to get it out there and done right.
I want to amend what I was saying earlier based on what you all have been talking about. So I agree that the Star Wars game has mechanics in it I really like. I really do. I like the plot points, and I like how the roles are modified. I really actually do like those mechanics. It goes along with what I like about 5th edition and the advantage and disadvantage dice. Also about the licensing thing and things being taken over. I thought I remembered this on the Farscape game, so I went and I looked it up. So it was published while Farscape was still going on, but the game got no support and the show was canceled soon after the game was released. But I kept thinking, I thought it won an award. And in 2003, I'm reading from the Wikipedia article, it got Best D20 based game. And that's awesome. I mean, it used the D20 system, so there was nothing fancy about it. But now that I'm thinking back on it, I'm like, well, yeah, it just never went anywhere. The show got canceled and it went away. And I think that, the Babylon 5 game was also based on D20. And, it's got a huge, diehard, group of followers. But, and it was published by Mongoose. But, I don't think it had enough to keep it going. And, one version, I don't know if it was the second version, and they actually used the Traveler rules. So it was this weird blend. And, Traveler always gave me, trouble because I never played with anybody who really knew the rules like you guys do. And so I think I think a lot of times it's not just licensing and who buys it, but whether or not it's got a strong enough following to really carry it.
So we should make a slight addendum. As far as I know, we've never played the Firefly role-playing game because there is no such thing. It's technically called the Serenity role-playing game because of licensing at the time. Because the license restrictions, they didn't have rights to Firefly, but they did have rights to Serenity. But, so if anyone, before they send an email, they say, well, actually, we know it's Serenity, but it's based upon the Cortex system, which is the one, because you mentioned Battlestar Galactica, right, Steve? That role-playing game. That was the Cortex system also.
What? There was a Battlestar Galactica role-playing game?
No, yeah, there is a Battlestar
Babylon
Galactica
5.
role-playing game. It was
Babylon
published
5.
in 2007. That is,
Oh
it's
my
based
God.
upon the
How
same
did I not know
basic
this?
rule set as the Serenity role-playing game. There's also a Supernatural role-playing game based upon the same set of rules, and there is also a Smallville one based upon the same set of rules, which, I liked Smallville, but
Yeah, that's kind of a weird one,
yeah.
Oh,
How do you do that one? I mean, how would you play that game?
No,
No,
Smallville.
Smallville.
Role-playing game?
I mean, does somebody?
Oh, Smallville. Well, you see, that was so ridiculous to me. I thought of something else.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know how you did. But the upshot of it is that I think that back to John's point, it gets very challenging to role play in a lot of these systems because you tend to, play the show or the movie or whatever it may be. And that's one of the nice things about a broader system like Dungeons and Dragons or Traveller or whatever it may be. You can kind of row your own way through the world or the universe.
Yeah, that's exactly why I don't like those pop culture ones. I feel like I have handcuffs. And I know they're not really there. I mean, I could do whatever I want with the system. I just feel like I have to do it that way. And my brain gets sort of locked into the intellectual property that's built up around that and how they, I don't know, how they put the whole thing together. And I just feel like I'm handcuffed. And I can't get out of that mindset when I'm playing those kinds of games.
And I think that's, that blows back on pop culture too, if you think about it, because one of the big criticisms of the Disney Star Wars movies has been that Star Wars, the great thing about Star Wars is it's this amazing, expansive universe. And yet we keep seeing effectively the same story in some form or fashion or some facet of that story repeatedly and not exploring the wider universe that an awful lot of the properties don't do that. And I think that's probably indicative of people who role play those tend to do the similar things, I would imagine.
I got to push back a little bit there. How do they keep retelling the same story? I mean, in every single one of those movies, the Death Star looks different to me. I'm just saying.
Well, anywho, so I think that there's a challenge there in that type of scenario to break outside of the mold of the intellectual property. And I don't really know how you do that effectively, even well. I suspect the Murder Bots was the best we've ever done for that. And even there was an element of same old in that.
Yeah, feasibly. Yeah, I thought it was kind of, I thought it was different. It didn't feel like the same thing. No one was, Luke Skywalker. Well, I guess technically we kind of summoned Han Solo to it to an extent.
Yeah. I mean, there was that sort of vibe to it at some level. I know. I tell you, though, that I think it's fair to say that we take a lot of inspiration from pop culture. So, you take a show like The Expanse. I mean, that is a very compelling universe, but, that is built out of some other role-playing game, and then it turned into a bigger story. And then, obviously, it's now the TV show, and lots of people love it. And the books, of course, before that. But there's a lot of space there, no pun intended, that you could use many systems to sort of tap into what they've got going on there. But it's not tied down to necessarily that intellectual property. You could do things similar to it or in its, as an homage, if you will, to it.
Yeah, and it is its own roleplay game now.
Well,
I saw it on the bookshelf over before all this pandemic crap went on. It was over at Barnes & Noble. I was like, well, that's pretty awesome. And I draw from Expanse for a lot of stuff. I mean, I like particularly that they don't have, or that anti-gravity isn't something that's prominent. You know what I mean? There's a lot of floating around. I like that. I don't like anti-gravity in my games.
It's kind of interesting the things that you gravitate toward in particular, but even Steve, that's just like a thing that you go, okay, that's critical, because if that's not there or it is there, I'm out.
I saw what you did there. Anyway, yeah, that's actually one of those systems that I don't know, like with Star Wars, like I said, you can see people gravitating, they want to be a Jedi, or I want to be a Sith, or whatever, some sort of, I want to be a smuggler, whatever, kind of playing into the roles that are already within the, the pop culture realm of it. But I think for like the Expanse, actually want to be, I don't know if it kind of, just the way the story is and how it's been done, I don't see where you'd kind of fall into that trap, at least character wise, and maybe not even, maybe somewhat with story wise, but if you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't know that I necessarily agree. I understand, but I mean, I can see somebody wanting to be like the cop guy, and some people wanting to be like the dude who is the reluctant captain, and all that. You can see those, and the guy that's effectively Jane for Expanse. You can see wanting to sort of galvanize in those kind of archetypes, for lack of a better term, in the Expanse game. Because I think there's the expectation that you've got a template to follow, and so you have to meet the elements in the template. Whereas a wider platform, if you will, or a canvas, you can kind of draw your own boundaries and templates to meet whatever it is you're trying to do at the time.
I just meant with, I mean, the way I feel with the characters in the Expanse, they're not quite so all encompassing in terms of, or maybe a better way to say it, the most of the characters in the Expanse are maybe not heroes, and maybe not really even anti-heroes, but kind of playing the line a little bit of both. You know what I mean?
It feels like they made the Expanse out of a role-playing game.
It almost feels that way. Yes, it does. But with
like Traveler.
Right. Yeah, I could see that.
Right?
So, okay, so let's talk a little bit more about this using pop culture as sort of a source of inspiration. Back to the Star Trek. I've always been fascinated by the idea of being part of a bigger thing. So most of the time within role-playing, you tend to be your party, and your party's doing your thing in this kind of isolation from other things that are going on. And one of the things that's very interesting to me about Star Trek, and admittedly I don't want to say rewatching because I'm watching it for the first time, The Next Generation right now, so I'm in a sort of a Star Trek mind of thinking, is I've always liked the idea of role-playing on a Star Cruiser, kind of an interesting stories that would potentially create. Now, I know it's not something that most of you guys are into so much, so it's not something likely to experience, but I think it's interesting that there are now rule sets for Traveler that sort of focus around that. There are people who are taking the inspiration from Locked Into Star Trek. What if we had something like Star Trek, but we made it in our own property that we can manipulate? And that's kind of cool to me.
Right. But I have to say really quickly, when you said what you said earlier, immediately went into my head was, I'm in a Star Trek state of mind. Sorry, that was my really horrible.
That's terrible.
I know, but it stuck in my head.
Terrible.
It came like a flash, and I had to get it out there. So
Billy Joel would be rolling over right now in his grave if he were dead, and if he weren't built like one of those Weeble Wobble little guys.
Then he deserves it. Then that's all I gotta say. He deserves it.
You know how Billy Joel reacts when people sing his stuff to him, right? Have you seen his facial expressions? They're not good.
Let's drop this line of conversation because we don't want like a takedown strike. So.
Right. For all of you Billy Joel fans, it's John at roleplaygeeks.com.
Yeah, not Steve or Frank. We have Billy Joel albums on our
Turnstiles
shelves.
is awesome, Billy. Love it.
Oh, I don't know about you. I don't know if you're just an ass kisser or if you
Turnstiles is great. I mean, that last album you put out was garbage, but I mean, Turnstiles is an awesome album.
You know, that kind of doesn't help us.
It helps. He gets us in good with Elton John.
Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah. It's so God. I'm gonna listen to Billy Joel when this is over, just so I can, maybe put some good vibes out into the ether.
Not for nothing, but Turnstiles is one of the top albums of all time. All time.
That is an amazing album.
It's a great album.
Summer Highland Falls is my favorite song.
I actually like Nylon Curtain a lot too. So,
Did John just do a eh?
Yeah.
I'm punching you in the face the next time I see you.
Go ahead. Then you'll get coronavirus.
Well,
sorry.
Going it.
You'll get SARS-CoV.
Corona fist.
You
get it right.
Have nothing to worry about in that regard because you won't see him for many, many weeks, and he'll forget many, many, many minutes after this.
That's true. True enough.
Point.
Yeah, he's not gonna remember. Anyway, we've gone a little bit afield of the conversation, but I think it's interesting that we now live in a world where a lot of this role-playing stuff is much more mainstream. So we're seeing references to role-playing being in pop culture. So I think that given the overwhelming popularity of it, I don't care for the show personally, but what's that show with Sheldon?
Critical Role?
No, with Sheldon.
You're talking
Big Bang Theory.
Big Bang Theory, right. So Big Bang Theory, they make reference to that. So, that may be a gentle way that people are, have been introduced to the concept of role playing within their pop culture that, is not really so much dependent upon genre fiction to do.
Yeah, I think Dungeons and Dragons is pop culture now.
Right, yeah.
I mean, it's its own little pop culture thing, movement.
Some people probably think the movies came first.
There were movies?
You actually might be right about that.
Well,
there were movies?
It's always fascinated me.
Yeah,
Let's be honest here. So the first real reference to Dungeons and Dragons in pop culture was the Tom Hanks awful movie that wasn't
Monsters and Mazes.
Yeah, didn't really say Dungeons and Dragons, but that's what it was really about. It was a terrible movie and
chick pamphlets as well.
No, I don't know what you're talking
God.
about.
Did you just have a stroke, or are you actually referencing something?
Oh my God, the religious pamphlet, the little bitty books that you'd find in well,
that's not so much pop culture.
And somebody would sneak into your.
That's not so much pop culture.
What?
That's just a thing that happened at the time. Well, certainly argue about that, but the point is that
that was a stroke.
Yeah. So there was that movie, but the thing that always surprised me, given how much of a debate Dungeons and Dragons was at the time, is on Saturday morning you could watch a cartoon around Dungeons and Dragons in the early 80s. It was amazing.
I loved that cartoon. I loved it so much.
It was great.
It
great.
Was. And it's just amazing to me that it existed and that people were okay with it. And in fact, have you seen the, is it Kia or Hyundai commercial that just came out about it's amazing. You got to go see it if you have. It references. Yeah, it references.
I haven't seen it.
It references the D&D cartoon heavily. It's astounding.
It doesn't reference it. It is they literally, the whole thing is the kids in their D&D outfits live playing in this thing is a part of the commercial. It is actually really awesome.
Yeah, and it's
and the way they get away from the Tiamat and what's his face is to jump in this Kia and take off. It is awesome. Yeah, it is crazy awesome.
It looks like a trailer for like the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon movie or something that's coming out. And it's just like, oh my God, it's amazing. And then it's a commercial. And you're like, oh, well, that sucks. But the rest of it is astounding. Yeah. But, okay, so that ended up in pop culture, right? But, even in the mid-2000s, one of the first times I remember seeing D&D reference in pop culture was Buffy the Vampire Slayer. At the last season they played, there's side jokes from here and there, but they actually played Dungeons and Dragons during the, I'm going to say penultimate episode or somewhere right around there, which was kind of cool. And then, of course, we saw it in Community.
Oh, yeah, they did a really good job with it, too.
That was one of my favorite episodes on television ever.
Yeah, I mean, that was arguably one of the top 3 episodes. Each one of those were in the top 3 episodes of Community. There's one I like slightly better, but, I mean, that's astounding.
Yeah. Of course, it was in Big Bang Theory, but...
Yeah.
We shouldn't. Sorry. Oh, true. Yeah.
And the IT crowd.
Yeah.
Actually, that was a pretty awesome episode.
I don't remember that episode.
Oh, really? It's great.
Oh, yeah. When Moss does the thing with the businessmen that are visiting. Yeah.
And
that was really good.
Yeah. Go see strippers. I'm going to play Dungeons and Dragons. Is that a sexual thing? Not even remotely. But we really should not bring up Big Bang Theory. That's just that's bad. Anyway,
but it's something that is more dominant in pop culture. So it's kind of interesting. There's a feedback loop that's going on, right? So that we draw inspiration in our gaming from pop culture, and then now pop culture is using gaming as part of its, storytelling. And that's we didn't mention the big ones, but there's dozens of little ones. Like,
there's dozens
what was that?
Of us. Sorry.
Yeah. What was that YouTube show that I'm finally blanking on? Redheaded lady, Felicity, is that her name?
Oh yeah.
The Guild?
Yeah.
The Guild, right. The Guild that's kind of based upon World of Warcraft, but also kind of role-playing. That was, kind of cool.
You know which one is not out there that I wish they would put out there? Or maybe it is out there and I'm just not aware of it, is Sesame Street or the Muppets. I would love to have a role-playing game where I got to play a Muppet. We should look to see if they have one out there.
I think you have done that from time to time in some of your characters.
Man, playing a Muppet going down Sesame Street, causing havoc, mayhem. That just sounds great.
There's no way that we're going to mix up Murderbots and Sesame Street, because that would be awesome. That's what you want.
It is. Exactly that would be so much fun.
Murder Muppets.
I say we do it.
Oscar,
I say we go.
Oscar the Jane.
This could be so much fun.
Well, there was that movie. What the heck was the name of it? Happy Time Murders.
Oh, with Melissa McCarthy. Yeah.
We could.
I didn't see that one.
I might try and watch that here and then. Maybe try and make up. Because basically, you need to kind of follow some sort of rule set of does everyone treat Muppets differently? You'd have to do all sorts of stuff. I mean, that's a whole thing for later and stuff. But anyway, yeah, we can maybe do that. I'll look into it.
Yeah, I'd love to do it.
Didn't I give you a copy of Toon?
You did. I don't like any cartoon type role playing games, and it's this mental association I have to Looney Tune type stuff and lawyers.
You guys and your this one little thing spoils the whole thing for me. I don't understand it.
Sorry. I think I broke Steve.
I feel you. It's a look.
I'm having a stroke.
Yep.
It's like I've got all the syllables, but none of the words.
It's like Wheel of Fortune.
You can't come up with it because he's got no vowels. You're going to have to buy some E's, Steve. You're going to have to buy some E's. You gotta spend money to make money. Come on.
Okay, so
Damn it.
let's wind this thing down. Are there any last thoughts that anyone has that isn't Jimmy about sort of pop culture and role playing or any of that sort of stuff?
I really, I said, I mean, I've liked some of the things that we've
Sorry,
played,
John.
like Serenity RPG. I really like the system in the original Star Wars, and I think they did an okay job on the second edition that they came out with.
The only problem with the second edition thing was the weird dice. Other than that, it was pretty good.
What did they do with the dice? I don't recall.
Well, they had different symbols. They basically used a variation of
yeah.
the X-wing dice
right,
from the miniatures game. And, the thing that was kind of cool about that mechanic that I really liked was you'd roll stuff and then like you could succeed but have a bad thing happen, or you could succeed or you could fail and get a good thing happen. So it was a little bit, it was kind of neat. There's more, is less black and white.
Yeah.
You did it, you didn't. It was,
success
stuff's
and
going
failure
on.
are a bit more abstract. So
Yeah.
yeah,
That was kind of cool.
That was true. That was very neat. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Someday we're going to have to get together and make the massive system that incorporates all these random ideas together, because there's a lot of cool ones out there. But that's a whole nother podcast.
Call it Boar Master. Sorry.
You can see Steve really likes the mechanics of gaming.
Right. Well, I like simple when it comes to games.
I have
That's
to
why
say,
he and I team up a lot.
That's one of the things I actually have to say about 5th edition D&D was I think they did a really good job with the rule set. And I especially love the whole advantage-disadvantage thing. I think that's a wonderful concept in gaming. I really like that. So, I mean, I guess there's something kind of similar to that into Call of Cthulhu version 7, at least, that we're playing right now. I really like that, how it does some of that, or it has a similar kind of mechanic. I like the simplicity of some of that stuff. Never mind my system with the, kind of crazy math. But for me, the math is easy, so it's easy. So, I know, sorry.
You damn...
So
arithmetic.
It's kind of weird that in the new Star Wars, how much trouble Steve had with understanding the dice. I was very shocked. Not to pick. I'm not trying to pick on him, but it's very interesting.
Fight. Oh, sorry.
That he understands the complexity of those dice on X-Wing miniatures very well, much better than I do. But sort of translated into role playing, for some reason, it wasn't that much more complicated than that from the miniatures game, but it really threw him for a while. I'm not sure if you ever really wrapped your head around all of it.
Because it's like trying to use a shoe for eyeglasses.
It was a little weird, I grant you, but I mean, it had some interesting mechanics to it. But it's just kind of, we're digressing from the topic at hand.
But not, it makes, yes, it's valid. Okay, fine, I had trouble.
Well, there's a lot of goodness
and
simplicity, though. There's the elegance, keep it simple, stupid. It's a simple, that's the way to go. So,
or you can go all the way on the other end and pull out your scientific calculator for John's games.
It's not that bad. I've made it. I keep simplifying it every iteration I do. I make it more simple each time. So
that's true. My calculus book has been put back on the shelf, and I pulled my trig book down for the next session. I'm ready to go, buddy.
Screw you, hippie.
All right. So let's wrap this sucker up. Is there any other parts of role playing and pop culture that we haven't just talked about that we wanted to hit?
Not in this one. I'm sure there's lots of things we could dive into, but I think we covered everything we wanted to this time around.
Cool. All right. So if you've got any thoughts about pop culture and role playing, or just sort of anything else you'd like to send us, you can contact us at the contact information coming later in the podcast. So that's all for this week. Thanks for spending some of your precious time with us. If you liked our show, could you just do us a favor and take a minute and rate and review us wherever you listen to the podcast? It really helps us out a lot. You can visit our website at roleplaygeeks.com, where you can find out all of our social media information or contact information. You can also feel free to email us at roleplaygeeks@roleplaygeeks.com for any questions or topics you'd like to suggest. Thanks so much, and we'll see you again next week.